Hi guys, this is Mrs. Fanton. Today we're going to start our asynchronous session number 2. We're going to start that by going over the Romantic period and what that means. Then we're going to take that further and talk about some of the symbols that are for light and for dark during Romantic literature. And then our final step is to go over our project number 2 and how we can use this information to complete project number 2. Okay, so let's start with a little background information on the Romantic period.
Romanticism is one of the most important historical events of all time. Unlike a lot of what gets called history, Romanticism isn't a war or a piece of technology or a political event. It refers to the birth of a new set of ideas. It's about a mindset and a way of feeling. Romanticism began in Western Europe in the mid-18th century in the work of artists, poets and philosophers, and it subsequently spread all over the world, changing how millions of people look at nature, children, love, sex, money and work. We are all now, more or less, in some aspects of our sensibilities, romantics. Romanticism is best understood as a reaction to the birth of the modern world and some of its key features: industrialization, urbanization, secularization, and consumerism. What follows are some of the central moments in the history of Romanticism. The Marais, Paris, May 1762. The Swiss philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau publishes a book about the raising of children, Émile, or On Education. It contains diatribes against the oppressive world of adults and praises the natural goodness, spontaneity and wisdom of little children. It is at points extremely anxious to get mothers to breastfeed their offspring, the first sustained argument for this practice in Western civilization. The world around Rousseau is growing ever more rational, scientific and technologically based. It's increasingly sensible, planned, sterile and bureaucratic. Against all of this, Rousseau emphasizes the child, the original rebel, the representative of everything that's pure, unschooled, and outside of adult discipline. It's the seat of creativity and genius. For the first time in Western history, glamour is directed not at the attainment of reason and adult self-control, but at the freedom from tradition and the natural innocence and sweetness of the child. Brook Street, London, August 1770. A precocious 17-year-old poet called Thomas Chatterton downs some arsenic and ends his life in a tiny attic apartment. He kills himself because no one wants to publish his poetry, which is concerned with beauty and wisdom, and because his uncomprehending family are applying pressure for him to become a lawyer. A cult soon grows up around the young, beautiful poet with shoulder-length chestnut hair. He becomes an emblem of something that will become very important for romantics: the idea of the sensitive, doomed person, often an artist, rejected by a cruel, vulgar world. Chatterton stands at the head of a long line of romantic heroes that will stretch from Byron to Keats to Van Gogh and eventually all the way to Jim Morrison and Amy Winehouse. Romanticism borrows from Christianity. The romantic hero is a secularized, Christ-like figure, the loser who is in truth deeply noble in the eyes of the few who understand. Leipzig, Germany, 1774. The German author Goethe publishes the quintessential romantic love story, The Sorrows of Young Werther. It tells the story of a passionate, doomed love affair between a young poet called Werther and a beautiful, clever young woman called Charlotte. Unfortunately for Werther, Charlotte is married, so the love is impossible from the very start. But that doesn't stop Werther, a dreamy and practical young man who loves the arts above all else. Like Chatterton, Werther is under pressure to have a sensible career and join bourgeois life, but he can think of only one thing: the impulses of his heart. Eventually, Werther can't take it anymore and kills himself. But rather than condemning him as a lunatic and a hothead, Goethe, one of the founding fathers of Romanticism, directs all our sympathies towards Werther. We're supposed to be on his side, admiring his passionate and entirely impractical attitude to love. The book becomes the most popular novel of a generation. 3 million copies are printed. Napoleon declares it the greatest work of European literature, and it dramatically changes how many people think of love, privileging dramatic outpourings of feeling over more traditional, rational concerns for class, lineage, and money. For a romantic, it's always right and noble to follow your heart. The disastrous results that follow aren't any argument. They're just proof of how desiccated and heartless the so-called adult, sensible world can be. Madrid, Spain, 1798. The artist Francisco Goya produces one of his most iconic images, titled "The Sleep of Reason Brings Out Monsters." It captures a quintessential romantic interest in the limits of reason and the power of the irrational over humans' fragile minds. To be romantic is to have sympathy for madness and to hold an almost vengeful attitude towards bombastic claims as to the triumph of rationality, science, and logic. The Lake District, England, December 1799. A young English poet called William Wordsworth and his sister Dorothy move into what's set to become one of the most famous residences in the history of English literature, Dove Cottage in Grasmere, on the edge of the Lake District. Here they will spend the next 9 years, and Wordsworth will write some of the greatest poetry in the English language, celebrating something that's very under threat, the natural world. He'll write about daffodils, oak trees, clouds, butterflies and rivers, and his work will charm and seduce Europe. Within a generation there will, in Wordsworth's own estimation, be more tourists than sheep in the Lake District. Most importantly, running through Wordsworth's poetry is an abiding hatred for everything mechanical and industrial. When many years later a railway line threatens to pass through the Lake District, Wordsworth and his followers do everything they can to have the train, a symbol of Wordsworth's hated technology, rerouted. To be a romantic is to take the side of nature against industry. It's to prefer a daffodil to a viaduct, a tree to a factory. At the moment when huge swathes of Britain are being covered in the often monstrous new cities that are making Europe rich, Wordsworth, the quintessential romantic, speaks up for the natural and the simple life. Niagara, United States, September 1829. The American painter Thomas Cole paints one of his most characteristic images of the mighty Niagara Falls with a couple of Native Americans in the foreground. Cole makes his name as a painter of sublime scenes, vast landscapes of the American interior, showing nature at its most dignified and impressive. Man looks lost and puny by comparison. This too is a typical romantic attitude, for romantics don't believe in God, but they go in search of the emotions one might once have had around religion, and locate them in the big, wide-open spaces of nature. To be a romantic is to find relief from the pressures of competitive city life in the sort of natural grandeur that transcends all human achievements and concerns. Westminster, London, April 1847. 14 years after some fairly incompetent officials destroy the British Parliament with fire, a new building reopens designed by a rising star architect, Augustus Pugin. Oddly, even though the building is new, it's made to look old, very, very old, medieval in fact. It's full of suits of armour and seated angels. When the architect Pugin defends the building, he argues that his building is noble because it harks back to his country's pre-industrial past, before it grew obsessed, he's careful to add, with money or technology. It begins a cult of the Middle Ages, a big theme in Romanticism, which identifies in the world of knights and castles, a nobility that is thought missing from the factories and shopping arcades of the modern world. Saint-Germain, Paris, May 1863. The French poet Charles Baudelaire writes a prose poem celebrating an unusual character whom he calls a flâneur, a stroller or loafer. A casual wanderer who has no particular job to go to and just spends his time observing busy street life of a modern city, threading his way through the crowds, strolling instead of rushing, sampling people's conversations and creating narratives for others' lives. Baudelaire, a typical romantic, admires the flaneur's playfulness and lack of practicality. This person isn't a waste of time. It doesn't matter that he doesn't have a job. For Baudelaire, he is a prince, unlike the boring wage slaves rushing to the new offices of capitalism. Le Havre, April 1891. The French painter Paul Gauguin sets sail for Tahiti, hoping to escape everything that is artificial and conventional. He lives in the Pacific South Seas on and off for the rest of his life, drawing young native women looking relaxed and natural without anything on. They are, in his eyes, evidence that civilization is what has made us sick, a core romantic belief. The Romantic movement has permanently changed our sensibilities. As the world has grown ever more technological and rational, Romanticism has come to stick up for the irrational, the untrained, the exotic, the childlike and the naive. There is naturally something a bit adolescent and immature within Romanticism, but then again, there can be something rather heartless, cold, dogmatic and arrogant in many aspects of modernity. One hopes this isn't going to be the end of the story, that we may in the future learn to soften the worst sides of modernity through the best sides of Romanticism, in order to create a more evolved alternative, what one might term an age of maturity.
All right, guys, let's go over some of the themes or symbols that you will see in literature that is either part of the light or part of the darkness in the Romantic period. So let's start with some of the light. So you're going to see things like a lot of warmth, a lot of love, a lot of caring in stories with light. You're going to see a lot of sun, a lot of brightness. You'll see people with a lot of knowledge. They'll know a lot of things. They'll be very wise. You'll see a lot of innocence in things like babies or animals or people. There's just a lot of innocence. You'll see a lot of colors that are bright and white and clear, whites, yellows, maybe soft blues, but really light, beautiful colors. People will be speaking a lot of the truth, be very fair, be very knowledgeable. And then you'll see a lot of scenes that are in the daytime. You'll hear a lot about beautiful nature, things like waterfalls and water and peacefulness and calmness. So stories with light, if you go that route in your project, should be full of a lot of these symbols or emotions or scenery or themes. If you choose to go more of the darkness route, you're going to have a lot of the dark colors, blacks, browns, grays, dark reds, really dark colors. You'll have things throughout your story like spiders, alligators, coyotes, a lot of those like more mysterious, creepy animals, insects, bugs. The people in this story will have more ignorance. They won't be as knowledgeable, or they might not know the truth. A lot of times stories with the darkness really focus on evenings or night times. They'll talk a lot about the moon or the sky at night. There's often a lot of the nature, the scenery is usually pretty bland, pretty dead, a lot of weeds, tumbleweeds, flowers that are starting to fall apart. So it's really dark and scarce. There's usually some kind of death or near death or type of event that happens throughout the story. So you want to keep that in mind as well. And there's usually some element of danger throughout the story. Okay, so let's talk about your project. Okay, the project will give you the opportunity to really think about American Romantic period and what you've learned, and then to write about it. So one of the things you're going to do is write a short story. Your short story should be at least a page. It should focus on one of the themes from the Romantic period. The link above will give you some ideas on themes, and we've talked about some themes already just previously. So you can write a short story. You can write a poem. Your poem should be about a half a page. It should have some kind of rhythm to it. Or you can write an essay, and your essay can be on one of the topics of light or dark. Okay. Now, if you go through, you can see what you can write about again. The darkness, you're going to write some kind of horror, scary, gloomy, or sad story. If you choose to go the light route, you're going to write something that's really happy, joyful, full of enlightenment, and loving. There's some examples right here of some dark and some light stories, or these are authors that really focus on that. Ralph Waldo Emerson is one of my personal favorites. He has some amazing quotes out there that you've probably read at some point and not even realized it was him. He's really good. Edgar Allan Poe, for those people that like dark, he is usually a favorite. He has some really creepy, crazy stuff out there. So you can read something by them and then kind of make up your own, but they are really great help. If you need even more inspiration, you can click here and watch a video. This is in your Canvas or in your format thing, in your course. All right, so here's some more information. Oops, I keep going back and forth. All right, the romantic period, 1 page in length. You can use the graphic organizer that's below if you would like some help, but you still need to type out your entire story. This option is only for students that have an IEP. So you can use it, but then you still need to type unless you have an IEP. Remember, you're creating a fictional story. It should be fake. Excuse me. You can write a story that's more like the darkness or the lightness. Totally depends on your preference. All right, if you choose a poem, it should be 15 to 20 lines in length. It should have a title. It should be full of darkness or light, one or the other. And again, it needs to have some rhyme. And here are some ways that you can do rhymed. If you're confused about this at all, you can click here and it'll give you help and examples. We also have some more links right here that you can click on as well that'll give you more help in writing the poem if that's the way you want to go. Okay? And then there is your rubric. Okay? If you guys have any questions on how to write your poem, your essay, your short story, you let me know. Remember, you only pick one. You can write in any of those 3 formats, and it needs to be either light or dark, and you want to make it as full of symbolism in those themes that we talked about as possible. If you have any questions, let me know. Have a great week, and don't forget to do your quiz.